I'm going to go back to some very basic. So how does the human brain actually develop? I'm not going to go into prenatal development because there's a lot that's happening prenatally. But from the moment a child is born, all of us, your children, if you have them, you, your parents, all of us with a brain, develop that brain in exactly the same sequence. It developed in three, actually sort of four, but in three really significant and easy ways to clock, to monitor, to watch. Now that we have the technologies to look inside a brain, we can see that this is exactly as the scientists had predicted it was. So I'm going to turn a little sideways here. First of all, it develops in this sequence. It develops from the back of the brain to the front. In the way back of the brain is the visual cortex. Even though our eyes are up front, the cortex that processes what we're seeing is way back here. It develops really fast. Within 6 months, your little babies in your lives that you see in the shopping cart behind you can see pretty well by 6 months. And they're sitting up already, and they're looking around, and they are processing all of that visual information. And there are modifications that happen a little later, but basically it's all there by 6 months. So 6 months to 25 years. So from here to here, it takes a long time to get to this frontal area of the brain. It's called the frontal cortex. It's where we plan, we organize, we control our impulses. It's a very important thing that we have as adults, hopefully. We didn't have it when we don't have it when we're 5. It's not that this is empty. Trust me, this has got information and connections that are being made constantly, but we don't have control of a lot of our emotional impacts. We don't have control of a lot of our logic and those kinds of things until much later. So back to front is the one way. The second way is inside, it grows outward. The third way is from the bottom up. Now, when we say the bottom up, we're going all the way back into the very brainstem, which is in the back part. If you feel the back part of your neck, right underneath that, you can feel the spinal cord. So that brainstem keeps us alive. It controls our breathing, our heart rate, our temperature regulation, all kinds of important things. It also contains, and this is something that nobody ever taught us until recently, it also contains these regulatory networks. So you say, what is a regulatory network? These are chemicals, neurotransmitters, hormones, and so on, that start really low in the brain, in the brainstem, but they proceed to impact all of our brain. The top of the brainstem then goes into a limbic system, which is in the very, very center, and then it grows out and up into this more planful area. The reason I even bring this up is because stress that happens to all of us every day, we're under stress, either a lot of stress or a little stress or toxic stress. And I'm going to differentiate between those three. These are, by the way, ideas that are already in your curriculum notebook, those little notes, but I'm adding maybe a little more explanation for you on those. The levels of stress that happen in early childhood could be positive stressors. You got to go to school. That's a stressor, particularly if you're 5, 6, 7, you're not used to it. You don't know your teachers. Maybe it's a new school. You don't know where the bathrooms are. I mean, there are little stressors all day long. But as long as those are resolved and you can breathe into them and realize that all you have to do is ask somebody where the bathroom is and they will show you or point to you. Those are stressors that are short-lived and that we learn from. It's very important. I went back to school because I'd been a teacher for a number of years, and I wanted to understand why some of my kids, even though I knew they were smart, why were they having so much trouble in school? So anyway, when we're really little, we have those positive stressors, but we also have what we call tolerable stress. Tolerable stress could be something like someone in your family dies, and you realize it upsets everybody, and everybody is crying, and people are not going to work that day, and they're canceling all their stuff, and they're calling other relatives. That's a very stressful time. It can be tolerable for a young child, all the way from birth, all the way up to 18. Something like someone dying impacts all of us, and it is stressful. But if there are other loving people around, so if you have somebody to mitigate that stress, that's what's tolerable. What you are going to be working with clients, audiences, colleagues, trying to explain ACEs, is that if we go over into that next level of stress, which is toxic stress, those stressors actually don't have the ability, at least in the beginning, of being mitigated by enough things. And what happens is it impacts our immune system, it impacts our ability to learn, it impacts lots of aspects of our life, including maybe our tendency to, instead of drinking water, having a little vodka in here, because I need to calm down. I need to tolerate the stress that I'm feeling. Now, where does that stress come from? It comes from chaos. It comes from someone hurting the child, hurting you, hurting me, physically hurting us, emotionally hurting us. So those kinds of stressors change the biology of the brain. What we're talking about is it changes the architecture. The reason I'm making a big deal about this beginning part is that the architecture of the brain changes if there's a lot of prolonged stressors that the child has no control over. And let's face it, when you're 3 years old and someone strikes you, they beat you, you have no control. You can't do anything. And it happened to you, it happened to your mind, it happened to your body. Those kinds of stressors, prolonged anxiety, prolonged poverty that leads into not enough food, no transportation, so there's nobody's able to improve their condition at that time. Those kinds of stressors. There's a slide that you will end up teaching. It's almost in every, I went back last night and looked to say, all right, is this basic information, do you have to cover it? The answer is pretty much you do, because it's in all of the incarnations of what you would be able to present to an audience. So one is called toxic stress in development. The slide looks like this. It's got a little girl who's, got her head in her hands, and she's crumped down on the floor. And it talks about the kinds of things that get impacted. And this your audience will begin to understand. But it impacts your attention span. If you've been hurt in your life, if you've had very stressful things happening, you may tend to become what we call hypervigilant. And good for you, because that's how you stay alive. By being hypervigilant, what it is that your brain, instead of being up here in the cortex, it comes lower into the brain, and you start to assess everything for, is it going to hurt me? It's a natural part of our system, and it's a good thing. Little kids that I used to teach in 5th grade, if they were lined up for something and some kid accidentally bumped into another kid, and that kid had been experiencing a lot of toxic stress, he'll turn around and deck this kid behind him. The kid did it by accident. He didn't mean to hurt this person, and he didn't actually hurt him. He just bumped him. So those kinds of overreaction are normal. If you have been in really horrific situations, overreacting keeps you alive. Bob Roten, who you have access on our site that you could go and you could watch some of Bob Roten's little tutorials. And he goes into great extent to say that our reactivity is normal, it's healthy, and I'm glad we have it. But it doesn't serve us well if we're the only one that is, decking the kids in the line, and that the kid really didn't mean to hurt you in the first place. So we want to help people to learn how to take that helpful, natural, biological response to stress and contain it in ways that are useful for the person. So it impacts what your slide says that you'll end up teaching from. It says it impacts the attention span. That's fine. Because here's a little statement about learning. And it affects the attention span and learning. Emotion drives attention, and attention drives memory. Those three things, those are related. Here is your emotional reactivity. Emotions drive what it is that you pay attention to. And what you pay attention to drives your memory. Kids that I used to teach, if they came from an abusive home and they come into the classroom and they're very dysregulated, by the time they finally can relax, maybe they remember the information from yesterday, or maybe they don't, because it never went in the first place. They weren't paying enough attention. So that's how these things relate to school, for example. So stress relates to school. The next thing that it says, the toxic stress in early development impacts your sense of safety. The kid has to know that part of being hypervigilant is to know that they're not in danger. And then it also impacts relationships. The kid immediately says, I feel safe with you. They don't say it to you, but they feel I'm safe with you or I'm not safe. So knowing about the brain, knowing that it's a good thing that we have this stress response system, we are responding to stress, changes our brain in these ways. Now, I work a lot with Dr. Bruce Perry, and this is his configuration of talking about various states. When I say mental states, you could be awake, that's a mental state, or you could be asleep. That's another mental state. Very different, but it's experienced in the brain. The states that when we are awake are the following. If everything is going really nicely, we can be calm. If things start to need our attention, we go to the next state, which is being alert. Those two states, hopefully you and I go back and forth all day long between being calm and being alert. Alert helps us to learn. You have to be alert when you're driving, for example. You can't just drive really calm and not be aware of things. So calm and alert is just fine. The next state that our brain, the lower parts of our brain, get into next after being alert is being alarmed. Now, most of the kids that you and I know and that we work with who are having difficulties in school or difficulties in behavior at their home or wherever out in the community wake up most days in the state of alarm. Their system is already geared up to expect bad things to happen, to wonder what it's going to be, to wonder how they're going to survive it. They are in a sense of alarm. The next stage or state, I said stage, I meant state. The next state that our brain can go into is fear. And then finally, terror. So the things that happen change our state. And the reason I go back to the biology and wanting you to know how the brain develops and that this part is the smart part of the brain and the brain stem and so on are just really rudimentary but critical parts. And that is because when we are in one of those lower states in our brain, it is physically that the energy that we have is flowing to that part of our brain, not to this part. Sometimes you'll stop a kid who's in the middle of pitching a fit and you'll say, what happened? What's going on with you? What happened? And the kid looks at you, literally, they're not lying. And they say, I don't know. They don't know. That part of their brain that is making sense of the world is not getting any oxygen, no nutrients. It's in some ways sort of shutting down. So when we are trying to talk to an audience about the impact of stress, a lot of people say, oh, you just have to tough it out. Well, if your brain is not getting oxygen to the parts of the brain that make sense of the world, getting tough doesn't help. Getting tough may make you more in a state of arousal and more aggressive. So the understanding of this information, I went back, as I said last night, and I really looked at it to say, is there enough information there to help you when you put up the slide? And not only do I think that it is there, but understanding the architecture of the brain, I think, may help you to understand that just as circumstances change in our life, where the energy is in your brain and in mine shifts. And so you want to do something to get the energy to come back into this part up here, into the cortex. Because as long as all of our energy is in our emotions, or God forbid, in our lowest part of the brain, where it's actually changing our breathing and our heart rate, which you and I know, when really stressful things happen, you can feel in your brain and in your body that things are not okay. So a lot of times I've given lots of talks on ACEs, and usually by the end, people will say, so what can I do about that? You have to change the brain. It's because the brain is where it started. So what things impact the brain to calm it back down? Breathing, for sure. The amount, and therefore a lot of times Sandy or Angie, when we're having our training sessions, or Sang-Hoon, we'll talk about breathing, and we take a moment and we say, all right, we're all going to take a breath in, and we hold it for a few minutes and then we release it. And you say, okay, great. What does that, why are we doing that breathing? It is exactly to stop the pattern of energy use inside our brain. Because when you take that deep breath, what you're doing is you're bringing that oxygen, and the oxygen then gets pumped up to the top parts of our brain. Our brain needs oxygen. It needs the nutrients in order to start to think again. And as long as we are down lower in our brain, we're not going to be able to calm ourselves down. Another thing that can calm us is doing physical activity. Dr. Perry, if you've ever watched any of his videos or heard of who he is, by the way, maybe you haven't heard of him. He has a new book out with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? And it all looks back at early childhood, mostly early childhood, or to, and don't get me wrong, it isn't only early childhood that can cause trauma. The kinds of things that we've seen in the news today, the floods, the fires, what happened in Hawaii, that at any age, that is a trauma that will need attention to those who survived it. But in general, thinking back to what Dr. Perry is saying, so breathing is one thing, regulating, taking deep breaths, not breaths up here, but breaths from the belly, which expands our ability to take in more oxygen. That's one of the things that we use. The other thing that we use is walking, getting up out of your chair, walking with a kid. You know, I used to have kids that would be throwing a desk. You know, they're just out of control. They're picking up the stuff and they're throwing it. And I would say to the kid, okay, let's go for a walk. Come on, come with me. And the kid will, and I'm walking really fast up and down the corridors and so on. And finally, and I just keep walking right parallel, right next to the kid. I'm not confronting him. I'm not asking him any questions because he can't answer me. I know he can't answer me. He's not in this part of the brain. He's way low. And so I will say, okay, finally the kid will say, Mrs. Tam, why are you walking so fast? And that's the beginning. That's the beginning of this relational connection that starts to regulate all of us. If you can connect, even for a moment, with someone, the ability for your brain to react, to say, oh, wow, okay. So the kid asks me the question, why are you walking so fast? And I say, wow, I guess I didn't notice I was walking fast. Of course, I had planned it, but I didn't notice I was walking so fast. Do you want to calm? Shall we just walk a little slower? And the kid will say, yeah. So then we walk a little slower and then we start to talk. So some of the things that calm the brain: breath, walking, connection to another human being, and also being parallel. One of the things that causes stress to all of us is when you think you're not okay and somebody comes right up in your face and they're looking straight at you. We don't like that feeling. It's pretty judgmental. So not doing that and having the ability to walk next to the person or sit next to the person, not confronting a person who's in this moment of stress. And so in your book, it talks about this window of tolerance. You can either be way more aroused than you need to be, or in some cases, kids, adults, we can just shut down. So that window of tolerance is pretty narrow for people who've had a lot of ACEs in their life. They've tried, they've stayed alive. Congratulations. That is the big number one thing. Whatever they did to get to that day, they are with us. So that is a success. So this window of tolerance, though, can shrink pretty small. And some of us can get hyper aroused and we can get really angry really quickly, elevating our heart rate, elevating everything, and being out of control. Or sometimes that same person can shut down. The shutdown in the moment may feel more successful, but neuroscience is showing us that that in and of itself gives us some temporary help, but as a constant state of being withdrawn and just complying with what somebody asks just because you don't want to confront can also get us into trouble. We can tell people, you know, your little kids can say, you know, you say, I need you to clean up your room and, you know, you need to do this today. Do you think you can do that? And the kid goes, yes. And you come back at the end of the day, nothing. And now we're confronting the kid because he lied. He didn't lie. He just told you yes to get you away from where he's at, which is withdrawn. So that window of tolerance, if you ever get questions about it, it shows, and again, so this says window of tolerance, and it can be either hyper aroused or it can be where the child is shutting down.